All right. So I'm here with Oliver Alexy, and I just want to make sure I get his title right. He is a professor of innovation and organizational design at the Technical University of Munich. So that's in Germany. He's been in the profession for 20 years ish, 25 years, but the same thing. I think we're roughly about the same age. And maybe I'm older. I don't know, but but uh, but we're here. We're just going to have a conversation today in terms of learning about his story, why he got into doing research. Why is this something that's actually interesting for him? And then get into answering and thinking about what's the difference between doing a doctorate in Europe versus in North America. There are some differences. So welcome, Oliver.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you for reminding me just how old I am. I might be younger, but I do look older.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. No, I look in the mirror. I'm like, oh, in my mind, I'm 21.
I think there is science that says we all stop comparing it between 28 and 32. So this is why you don't think you're getting older. But I digress. So I entered the field, profession, business, whatever you want to call it, pretty much exactly 20 years ago. So it's been 20 years earlier this year, that I started my PhD, and graduated. Well, after that, done all of that in Germany, actually. So the PhD, or my university training and all of this is in Germany. Then did a postdoc in the UK, and sort of now I'm back in Germany. Sort of all roughly in this area of innovation studies. Now, to your question, how did I sort of start? I'd say by accident.
Really?
So complete accident. So I come from a family where I think I have a great uncle that is a dentist, when dentists are sort of university trained in Germany. And I wouldn't know of another family member sort of close that even sort of went to university. So I knew what a doctorate was, and that it sort of was cool, and all these sort of things. But it's not like, I woke up one day, I should be a professor, and I didn't even know what a professor did, given I didn't know any professors. The sort of two events that I think happened in my life. When I was at school, there's a mandatory visit to, I don't know how it would translate into the US. So the German word for it is the employment agency. So it's basically where you would go if you're unemployed and find a job. And they have a really good algorithm that sort of predicts what kind of jobs you should do. So you basically say, I like to work with people, and yada, yada, yada. And mine said I should be a university professor.
Really?
I think a teacher of religious studies came up relatively close after, which there may be quite a lot of connections.
There's a lot of
the amount I'm talking is not that dissimilar, but It was literally the first time in my life anything ever confronted or I don't know, opened up this opportunity. What it was, I had never thought about it. I had thought about being a teacher, because that was something I could see. And that was sort of the first time. And then, of course, I went to university and all of these sort of things later. But actually, so the Germans have to do a fairly large final thesis. That's just the way our degree programs are structured. It's like for a master's, it would be like an equivalent of about 6 months that you're supposed to work full time on a thesis. And I hijacked mine. Like, it was supposed to be with a company on a relatively applied problem. And I figured out that I liked, reading the literature and sort of, doing something that was, I wouldn't call it a conceptual paper. So in hindsight, that's what I tried doing. But it was like this kind of more generic puzzling, rather than applying a solution somebody else had done. And sort of over time, then also sort of in the PhD, I discovered that this was really something that interested me. So basically, I wasn't cognizant that I had done that test like years and years before this, but those are sort of the 2 points in my life where, more or less by accident, I figured out that I enjoyed, or that I could enjoy. That's the right word, I think, of saying it. I could enjoy doing this sort of sciencey thing, and then I applied. I'll talk about potentially more elaborately later, but as a German PhD student, you're employed by a professor. You don't apply to a program, you apply to a person. and you got basically a full stipend, salary job, whatever you want to call it. And I was lucky that basically a professor had just started at the institution that he started at. Was looking sort of for a couple of new people, and I was one of the people who interviewed. It's even weirder. So he had an introduction to students, like introducing, this is the courses that I'll teach, that I wouldn't say hijacked or something like this. And I wasn't the only PhD applicant that came, but basically I followed up my written application, got an interview, and all these sort of things that sort of worked out in the end. But by and large, accidents.
Yeah, and it's peculiar how it happens that way, right? So do you know? So two things. So do you know what the algorithm was picking up on? With and what exactly what was going on behind the scenes?
I have no idea.
So you have no idea.
No.
Okay.
No. Okay. It must be like that, because the teaching thing was consistent. So it must be that it's the working with, in a sense, young people and training. But I have no idea where the professor came from. I have absolutely no idea.
Okay. And you remember that was like
yes.
a striking thing in your mind.
Yes, because other people told me, sort of in like Oliver, you talk too much. So sort of this makes sense.
And what were your parents' perceptions with all of this? I think that I think this is a big thing, because it's in my world, it was very different in terms of going into the university environment.
But I said this. I think this is where sort of the institutional or national, whatever else, cultural differences kick in. So it's not, and in particular in recent years, it has changed. It's not that university professors are the highest status people that are around in Germany, but like universities in general are still regarded sort of as high status. So a very nice example of this is it's really hard to get a flat in Munich, sort of to rent a flat. But if you basically come with a piece of paper that says, hey, I work for the university, despite the fact that your salary is nowhere near as high as anyone else's, there's quite a lot of sort of landlords and landladies that are basically like, ooh, I'm getting a high status people in my flat. I can show off to the other landlords and landladies that I have, like, I don't know, a professor, a PhD, or whatever else in my rooms. And I'm not making this up. This is actually true. Like, even as a PhD student, when I try to find a flat sort of around here, so there's a disadvantage because your contract is temporarily limited, but you have an advantage because you're high status, and sort of if you're a little more senior, the fact that you're a civil servant and all these sort of things carries a very positive connotation. So it's a safe job. Germans like safe. It's sort of intellectual. Germans like intellectual. So there's the only sort of criticism that you would get is, I don't know, that you're working the ivory tower and that it's not a real thing or something like this. But there's not this which I think might apply in other areas, other parts of the world. Sorry, that you're basically fearful that your child in 3 years' time will be both broke and unemployed. So that didn't exist. It was much rather there is somebody who I don't know, has this shot at a high status profession. Though I don't know, it wasn't necessarily a conversation we would have regularly had at the dinner table. How can you be the most high status child? That's not how I was raised.
I mean, that's not how life works, though, right? Like that's a strange thing. But I think, at least in my family, it was. If I would have became a priest, right? So my family is very, very Roman Catholic. If I would have became a priest, and I was asked when I was like 15 years old, there was a letter from the diocesan that, asking me if I wanted to do it. And it wasn't my thing. And, I thought about it, wasn't my thing. But I think that there is still the same similar sort of status in terms of, because I think it had very similar roots, right? Like, it comes from essentially much of scientific effort. It's just a spin-off of the Roman Catholic Church, just like, many different things, right? And so it still connotes some of this status, even in fields that you would consider perhaps as not lucrative as, say, innovation or whatnot. But I wouldn't say, we're we're very, very lucrative in what we actually do, but it's a modest, it's a decent living.
Oh, and actually, coincidentally, sort of priests in Germany would have there's something about the general, I don't know, how do you evaluate the church at this point in time, but if you just take the job itself, not the profession, it has a similar characteristic. It's safe.
Yeah.
There is actually some weird agreements between the state and the church and whatever else, I think, and now funding works and all these sort of things. So there is if sort of culturally you appreciate sort of predictability a lot, then I don't know, going to university and becoming a priest, there may actually be similarities. And sort of, at least in my family, I mean, yes, you would know the downsides of what it would mean to necessarily be a priest, but you wouldn't know the downsides of what it would mean to go on an academic career.
Yes.
It's not like anyone tells you on your first day, like, Oliver, do you know how many PhDs there are in Germany and how many professor jobs there are? Because no one knows. And then sort of it's like you go in there sort of happy-go-lucky, it's like, I'm going to be a doctor, like a real doctor. As long as they don't call my name on the plane, I'll be safe. So I didn't even, like, beginning my PhD, I had no clue that, I don't know, there was an academic job market that would be fiercely competitive and all these sort of things. It was just...
So tell me about this experience then. Like, how did you learn all of these things? Because you're moderately successful. I would say you're doing okay. But how did you learn about all this kind of stuff? Because I think for many of us, there's a practical element to figuring out the strange world, because if you don't have parents. But again, in the academic profession, there tends to be a lot of inheritance that happens. If your parents were academics, you're very likely to be academics. How did you learn about all of these weird moments? Like, were there moments that you were like, oh, this is not what I thought it was going to be?
Okay. So I got sort of I think I have a learning story, and I'm not sure if I should say this when it's being recorded, but I have at least one example of how still unaware I was. Sort of just to make sure that the learning doesn't sound like it's planned. It's still sort of a lot of sort of mixture and luck. My PhD advisor is Joachim Henkel, who's also sort of German. Who's very smart, very kind, was an exceptional mentor and all these sort of things. And almost like in a master and apprentice system, I learned by watching and sort of by paying attention, by asking some of my own questions, and by talking to other people. So it's much more sort of a social network kind of story, but not necessarily a preferential attachment, because I didn't know who to attach to. I wouldn't have known. It just happened I attached to a relatively high value node. And then sort of by observing that person, if I would have observed anyone else, if I had started there, I got lucky. Sort of that not just how he worked in general and sort of how he was trained and so on and so forth, but also compatibility with my style of working, the network that he introduced me to, and so on and so forth. That I was able to progress. And if of course, I'm not going to say any names, but if I imagined I would have started, at some other place, that would have naturally, irrespective of any talent I may or may not have, it would have naturally sent me to a different direction, and potentially with sort of a ceiling that might have been at a different level. And so again, I just got lucky that I got an offer from somebody who, in hindsight, was a fantastic sort of entry point into this profession. But I promised it wasn't that smooth. I remember when, so I graduated. So just to sort of show, I didn't know what the academic job market was. I didn't know how it was evaluated. I thought that, I must be the smartest person on the planet, because I had limited visibility on I wasn't necessarily the best person in the cohort. I was sort of one of the better performers. But again, the cohort I observed is very limited. So I graduated roughly 3 years, and sort of for everyone who's listening, like, what, you graduated 3 years? It's not because I'm so incredibly smart. It's, I thought I had graduated. I had probably received training equivalent of, 3 or 4 years, but you would still compete with people who are significantly further down the line. And I sent out basically applications to Why did I send stuff? I think I sent applications to assistant professors even in Harvard. I got really nice rejection letters, but I would not have understood like why I was rejected. I was completely.
I don't even think I got rejection letters.
No, I gotta read it. I could really. I think I have them all. I have like beautiful letterheads with beautiful rejections. And it was very clear. So again, with the benefit of hindsight, I now know it's relatively clear. I got the, oh my gosh, why did this person send something in first level? Or, yeah, like standard rejection kind of thing. But of the, I don't know, 30, 40 applications that I sent out, I think I got 2 job interviews, both postdoc level. One at Imperial College, where basically the people that invited me knew, again, my advisor thought he was smart. I was like, we need a postdoc right now. We got money lying around, so let's fly this kid in. And then I had an interview panel at this point in time consisting of the person who was the incoming editor-in-chief of the Academy of Management Journal, and I didn't know who he was. I had an author of a paper at SMJ that was currently more or less the impact factor of the journal, given how distributed it was. I actually happened to know the paper. I didn't make the connection there either. So the third scholar came from a slightly different domain, but was just as accomplished. And I was just having a sort of nice conversation with them. I was completely clueless. Sort of, they asked me questions, I gave them answers, and they were like, "Okay, the kid wasn't completely stupid." But I just got lucky. I completely and utterly sort of lucked out because more or less they gave me the benefit of the doubt because again they knew my advisor and kid doesn't seem stupid and we need somebody. And then I was fortunate to sit around for the next sort of 4 years around several dozen other postdocs, about a dozen senior faculty, where basically you grew and learned together. But again, there's no like, ooh, Oliver, what can you learn this morning? Here's a list of the brilliant things that you need to be, I don't know, a level 100 professor and get the leveling up award for being the best professor. I had not even an idea what sort of what it is. The amount of mistakes I made, just with the benefit of hindsight again. But you see how then the 3 + 4 years, I got 7-ish of
it's
training.
7 years.
Yeah. Then in essence, I had seen a lot of the things that I needed to see. Plus, there's a capacity. There's still more things to see, but I can't process them all possibly.
Yeah. And as well as you got exposure, right? Like that's sometimes it's not exposure to, I mean, it's both sides, right? Like people get to know who you are, but as well as if you go to a school that is quote unquote not mainstream, whatever that is, right? You still need to figure out how does this whole mainstream thing work, right?
Completely with you. So it turned out that when I moved to London, one of the projects I had started just before leaving wasn't the exact same question, using the exact same data set as a co-author of my advisors, who was based at London Business School at that point in time. So we hadn't had a conversation before, but basically advisor was sending an email saying like, look, like you guys are working on the same thing and you're in the same place and you should talk. So we did. And then sort of that became a co-author, introduced me to another colleague at LBS. We've written as a team of 3 several papers together over the next couple of years. And again, sort of just going over a couple of sort of, well, it's a couple of miles across London to a different place. Again, you're like, oh my gosh, this is a lot different. I've never seen this. Why is it different? And what is it different on? Why are they doing the things they're doing like this? And so it's just as you're saying, it's sort of having multiple sort of points of observations where at some point in time, either you identify a pattern or you identify sort of points that I don't know, you resonate with more or less. And again, I got lucky and I had more time to sort of continue the observations. I still don't know what mainstream is, quite frankly. But I understand sort of some of the things that I maybe have sort of reasonable talent in, and some of the things I'm not so good at, some of the things I like, which I think might be more important, some of the things I I don't like as much. And again, I just, as you were saying, I learned that by being exposed to sort of multiple flavors of what it might mean to do the same thing, but in different ways in different places.
Okay. So I have a couple of questions. The first one's kind of a big thing. Oh, yeah, I actually have three. So the first one is, you mentioned luck a lot. How do you generate luck? How do you actually figure out what is, because, on the flip side of that, it's decision making under uncertainty. You're picking up on some signal, right? That's the flip side of, you're an intentional actor making decisions, and you're picking up on something. That's one thing. The other thing, and both I think are equally right in terms of the perspectives. The other thing is, what is it that you actually are picking up in terms of identifying? Is it really just location, the geographic location that actually matters? Because I think that's ultimately, because there's so many people that listen to this, they're from all over the world. They may say, well, I'm in India right now, and I'm just not in the right position, and then I'm penalized. Which is, is probably partly true. And then the third thing is that if you look online's a mess, right? Like, if you start looking on it, it's extraordinarily negative for PhDs. All the memes are always like very negative. And one of the sort of negative memes is that you do a postdoc forever. Right. And you just keep doing more and more postdocs. You hear all the sort of dreaded stories that people just get more and more postdocs. Here you did 4 years, which is a long time. Is that something that was prosperous for you? How do you know whether you're spending too much time in the scientific profession versus, because you could have switched and gone into consulting or whatever. Right. So those three questions, I think, are really important to me, or important to the audience to think about.
So you gave me the easy questions, and I'll definitely solve all three of them internally. Let me start with the first, but let me start with the caveat. I think the first and the second, or my answer to the first, will be intricately connected to the caveat you brought up with the second, sort of with location. I firmly believe that quite a lot of the things that I ended up getting in the end are complete and utter luck. And I wouldn't say something like, I don't know, there's a saying in Germany that you can basically enforce your luck. Yeah, that if you try often and things like this, then good things will happen, or whatever else. Again, if you know a game of chance, your chances don't change by playing more often. It's just your losses that increase. I'm very sort of pragmatist in this. It's it's not like I have a guiding principle, then I have a sort of motivational poster at the wall. But if I had this kind of hat poster, it would be sort of Seneca's, if you don't know where you're going, no wind is favorable.
I'm a big fan of the Stoic thinking at this moment.
So so this basic idea that, yes, I might not be able to predict where I end up, but if I don't know where I'm going, how would I possibly be able to make efforts that are synergistic? So there's actually also something where, if we go sort of research-wise, it confuses me in some of the branches of the entrepreneurship literature. Yeah? Sort of, if I'm basically just driven by, I don't know, external feedback and my own capabilities or whatever else. However, how would I ever really be able to do something synergistic that requires more than one step ahead? Yeah, sort of something that's big and sort of long-term or whatever else requires you to assemble a couple of resources. Now, whether you get there, you don't know. But if you think about it more, not like a line that you're walking, but sort of a pathway with guardrails. They need to be going in a certain direction for you to sort of be able to progress. So at the point in time that I started the PhD, I was married already. My wife and I, we both come from the south of Germany. We think this is one of the most beautiful places on earth. So we had always a sort of, in the long run, and maybe we'll come back there. And sort of with this general idea, it's not like I can say, okay, what do I need to do exactly to be here at what day? But I can look around and say, okay, in my profession, what do people look like that are here? And what are other people that seem to be looking like? They might be coming back
Mm.
here. And I can think, okay, what did those people do to be where they are, and so on and so forth. And it still doesn't mean that sort of the choices that I make will be right and will bring me there. And it may not even be that there's a position, and so on and so forth. But if I want to have the remaining possibility that if a position ends up, I'm qualified, I can make a rough estimation for what I need to look like, and blah, 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 blah. So I could actually say relatively early on, so at the point in time that I basically started the postdoc, that I would not be strong enough to compete locally. So I would need to go abroad in order not just to get better, but get better at a pace that is faster than all the people who are a few years ahead of me, because we would be competing for the same position. And so at the end, whether I ended up in London or Copenhagen or Paris or whatever else is secondary. It's I need to go through that sort of kind of thing to get to the just tempo, the speed. And then potentially there's a next step, and there's a next step, and there's a next step, but it's not necessarily it has to be this step, but it has to be this general kind of qualification, yada yada yada. And they may change over time as I learn more things. But it's sort of clear that it was I need to become better about just what research is and how it works, but it wasn't necessarily I need to publish in this journal and so on and so forth. So I got lucky then in the end that one Southern German institution out of nowhere introduced tenure track. Like literally did not exist in Germany before that. It was the first time ever. And all the Germans were so confused, I'm exaggerating, that I was one of few people who applied. So the fact that I had started walking this direction is what enabled me to do the application then again in the first place, and of course sort of made the sort of tenure process a little easier. So again, there's just so many positive external events that sort of would have brought me there, but without having, I'm not sure whether there's too much jargon, but without having some sort of interpretive scheme, how would I know that this is just a random event or a chance event that I can leverage? And I can only say this by saying I want to go over there or over there. And again, if either of these events would have required me to have some sort of preparation, if I have a certain direction, I need to have that preparation in place. If you're just in it for the journey, fine. No, but again, I sort of had some sort of directionality that I wanted to get towards. So all I can do is think about, in essence, necessary conditions. So what is required and how can I get this? Now, this is again where your second question comes in. That's a lot easier to say if you are, I don't know, in the middle of Europe, with one of the best connected airports, I don't know, strong social system, all these sort of things that make life easier, and the potential downsides of anything relatively small. What's the worst that can happen? Like if I fail at this, I go into consulting. I make more money than I'm doing, and so on and so forth. So duh. So this is a lot easier talk. So I think the first thing that I tried expressing, thinking about where it is you would like to be and figuring out what it is that is required to be there. And this is something that anyone can do. And now getting those things is a very different
It's
story.
very different. Yeah.
Having said that, if the people are there, there are these people there, they got those things. Well, at least you can ask them, or you can look what they did, and so on and so forth. And if you figure out that there's somebody in front of you who is a professor because their parents were professors, or it's political nepotism or whatever else, that's going to be tough. But potentially there may be an outlier or something like this, and you can see whether there are sort of steps that you can take. So something that, for example, I would never have had on my radar at this point in time, because I would have never thought about it, is doing a PhD in the US. But doing a PhD in the US, there's a question whether you want to go there. So we go over this, But let's just say doing a PhD abroad is actually easier than like with the benefit of hindsight, it turned out to be easier than I thought. And yes, there's questions about the funding, but there's opportunities to get it. What I would have been worried about most, again, coming from a background that puts me at some sort of unfair advantage, what I would have worried me most is my relative competitiveness. But the point is, coming into the program is very different. We're looking at the people coming into the program is very different from looking at the people coming out of the program. Yeah. So that even the smartest professor around you couldn't do all the things they now can do when they entered that program. They maybe has a baseline smart, but a lot of that difference is from the training. So if you're just one of many first-year students, and so the difficulty may lie in identifying these opportunities for just money, literally just surviving, and I'm not sure what I can recommend there, because it would all just be arrogant. But assuming there is a way of figuring that one out, the other problem that, again, that would have sort of held me back, which is sort of this fear of, I don't know, not good enough, I'm not smart enough, and all these sort of things. Out of the 10 people that are going to be in the room, and there's 2 people who are just, I don't know, who are definitely going to be smarter than you. Everyone else is just working hard. If you're lucky, you're one of the 2. Then you're just smarter than the people in the room. You should still work hard. But everyone else is just working hard, and working hard is something we all can do.
Yeah, and so a couple of things I took away from what you're saying, and I can't remember what the third question that I had asked. But that's
online postdoc.
Oh yes, postdoc. So a quick answer, I guess, is a postdoc worth it to take a long time?
In my case, yes. But again, I knew I was lacking. There was something missing, and I knew that this was a smart way of getting it, and I got it, and a good chance. Now there is, in many places, in many disciplines, the postdoc as, I don't know, parking people, or I don't know, further weeding them out, or because postdocs are cheaper than professors, I don't know, institutional pressure, whatever else. There's lots of reasons why postdocs are bad, or are managed poorly, or institutionally poorly set up. Mm-hmm. In the ideal case, I've been trained to think of tenure as a 6-year postdoc. It's a point in time where you figure out what you're good at. It may not be what you started with. It may not be the place that you're in. But assuming you have a direction in which you want to go, it is a period in time that will allow you ideally to progress from where you started to where you hoped to be going. Now, if you're making no progress, or but if the institutional setup, and again, this may not be you, it may literally be the world around you. If the institutional setup is I know you get half-year contracts and things like this consistently, that doesn't allow you to progress, then yes, at some point in time you need to call it quits. But again, I mean, this is something that will be beyond some people's control. Sometimes you just need to take a job to pay for the bills, and then ideally you have some sort of, at least in my case, it would be an evaluation system of, does this help me sufficiently progress, or at least not deteriorate on where I want to go?
Yeah.
And does it allow me sort of to be the kind of person that I don't know, I want to be, like work on topics that I find interesting, ethically appropriate, go home in a way that I can still see my family, and all these sort of things. Yeah. But again, a lot of that is just luck.
So I love your perspective. I think we probably resonate a lot with it. So one of the ways that so there's a moment where I was like, I don't know if I want to do this, because it was right after the PhD. I was supposed to graduate in 2009, and that didn't work out, right? So the financial crisis was happening. Mm-hmm. So I ended up staying until 2012. And getting my first job here at my institution. But there was a moment where I was like, what am I doing here? And the best thing that helped me to make this a hard decision is treat it like a very rational decision, and create Excel spreadsheets and go through. Otherwise, you quantifying these things, it's important to figure out, like quantifying your fears, and otherwise it's very difficult to decide. And uniformly it came out like, oh, I should continue to do this.
Yeah.
Even though it's really wasn't, if you're looking at financial rational, it's not financially rational in any sort of way. And so you have to make that decision in your mind of, okay, why am I actually doing this? What's the real reason to actually do this? I've done the financial calculation twice, and it's not until I'm 55 that I'm actually going to break even compared to being an undergrad with an engineering degree. But you decide that you're going to do this, and you kind of stick with it. So there's some irrationality to it. So one of the things that I was thinking about when you were talking, so two things. I was resonating tremendously when you were talking about guiding principles, and you don't really know what you're doing, because this whole reciprocity project and building a platform that helps out researchers, it tries to create nearly rejectable, non-rejectable research papers in grants, is such an amorphous, strange thing to most people. And it is, you probably study innovation, but I didn't realize how difficult it would be and the barriers that you would face, even being in studying innovation, being in a university. There's a lot of and we talked about even some of them, where it's difficult to even just get institutional support and those kind of things that really do matter, even though you're trying to help out. So part of this, and a huge chunk of it, thankfully my wife is amazing, we're paying for this ourselves, as a family. And part of it is just this leap of faith that you just have to jump out. And I've spent unbelievable amounts of money, and time and effort of building this thing, but it's part of, how else do you do it other than just going out and doing it, right? There's some elements of practicality that are to this. So it's deeply resonating with what you're saying, is that it doesn't really make sense when you're going through it at the moment. And maybe that there's a pattern after, but when you're going through it, you're like really deciding that this is stupid. Why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Right. And then on the other side, what I was thinking about is a lot of what you were saying is framing how do you minimize the sort of losses in your mind, right? If you compare in your mind to some very, very significant success, success aspirations or reference points, everything feels like a loss.
Mhm.
It all feels irrelevant. But if you compare maybe I go overseas, maybe I go to, whether it's America or England or, Denmark or wherever, and do these things. What is the minimal that I can live off of and still be happy? And that's not just sort of financial, but that is also thinking about what is the minimal support that I need, because that is a big cost to go, several hours away on a flight, for example. You're away from family and all those kind of things. So how did you deal with framing these losses? How did you position it in your head that this wasn't a loss, but it was an adventure? This is
Yeah.
an opportunity. This is beautiful.
Um, two answers. Yeah, two answers.
And I have a
Go ahead.
follow-up too. How did you deal with this with your spouse?
Oh, that actually makes it a lot easier, because I can do that in combination. So I hear you also for the sort of your first comment, where I think the sort of, other than Seneca, I think much of my life is inspired by Yoda, which I mean, it's a very simple. There is no try. Yeah, so either if you don't do it properly, you're still putting in resources that you will not go back at the time, you will not get back, and so on and so forth. And so either you do it or you don't do it. And that, I think that makes a lot of sense. And you cannot turn back the clock. You cannot unpublish a paper. All these sort of things are, I don't know, exemplify a logic of there is no try.
Hmm.
You either do or you don't. And that sort of connects to the second point is, and again, also to the caveat that you mentioned before, is this question of what's the worst that can happen? That's sort of like, what if I go to London, I do a postdoc, the worst that can happen is I spend several years of my life in sort of one of the most exciting cities in the world that I'm aware of. Sort of, yes, there may be other exciting cities, and some people might find London boring and horrible, at least for me. I come from a suburb of Munich, sort of, and London has more people than, I don't know, a lot. Um, I know it has more than 8 million inhabitants, but sort of relatively speaking, it's sort of, there was just no comparison. So the worst that could happen is we'd have an adventure. So that I guess it goes back to sort of precisely your point, and we'd have an adventure. And my wife actually happens to be a teacher for English as a foreign language. And so she was even more excited about we go and have an adventure. And go to London. Again, what's the worst that can happen is we have an adventure. And it turns out there are actually a lot of things that could happen that we never anticipated, that you could postdoc rationalize and make nicer than they were at that point in time. But this general idea of we will come out of this and be able to look back and say, like, look, we lived in London for a couple of years, would have already been sufficient for us if, like many of the other things might not have worked out as well as we would have thought. So that was, again, at that point in time, remarkably easy. Now, I don't know if things hadn't gone as well as they overall did for us. If I had not gotten then that offer in Munich that I received right after London, would things have gone as swimmingly? I don't know. How should I? But there might have been still ways, of sort of doing this in sort of a positive frame. And we thought we would be in Denmark after this. That was our expectation, that the next step in our life would be somewhere or at some stage, we might end up in Denmark. And again, I was fortunate because, again, my wife loves languages, so she's like, wow, I can learn Danish. And my job would have been to say, okay, how can I arrange my day to make sure that she also has a life there, and the job and friends and whatever else. So you go, of course, you go as a team. Yeah, it's like, but and how to say the sheer fact that we'd be in the adventure together made the adventure easier for me, rather than more complicated or something like this. So again, my configuration might be very fortunate for this kind of endeavor. But so London itself was probably the easiest place of all places that I could have potentially gone, and it turned out it was a good place to go.
It's super cool. I can get a lot of sense from this that playfulness, I think, is incredibly important. It doesn't get enough play in the business world. We don't talk about that enough.
Yeah.
And the other thing we don't talk about enough that is critically, I just talked about this last night on the Reciprocity podcast, is unconditional love. Like, I know it sounds so stupid, and it's not part of, like, we're not going to teach this, but I actually want to start teaching some more of these things because it's so critically important. Of trying to figure out, okay, when there's these moments that happen, to be supportive and encouraging, and it requires not only just in the family unit, but often, in businesses, there is this one way that you could sort of frame a lot of the problems that you experience is like, that was bad, you shouldn't have done that, cut it off, and divest that particular asset. Or another way is thinking, okay, like, that didn't work out, let's try to figure out how do we do this better
Yeah,
the next time, or find different opportunities
yeah,
that are interesting?
yeah, absolutely. What would need to happen for this to work, and how can we make
Yes.
it happen? Yes.
Yeah. And that requires some, it's not easy by any means. There's lots of discussions that happen, but you have to figure out, like, how do you navigate these things, right?
I still don't know, I think, is my honest answer. I can say that it comes back to what you said about spreadsheets and all of this before. So I remember how I tried and sit down, like, which places in the world, where the world was, of course, not the world, but which places in the world could I imagine applying to? And I tried to sort of come up with a way of scoring. And it turned out, and whatever elaborate way of scoring that I developed, it was either so, I don't know, overspecified that made no sense. Like, there was no way I could evaluate these criteria. Um, or it was so blah that it would be completely meaningless. At the end, I figured out that I only needed two criteria. Do I think I can work there?
Yeah.
And do I think I can live there?
Yeah.
And I figured out relatively quickly that it's really nice if I could work there, but if I couldn't live there, I would also, in the long run, not work there.
Yeah.
And that I have now some sort of imaginary threshold level on both. And sort of, if you go to work every single day and you cry because you hate it so much, that is tough, even if you're super happy at home. It's even tougher the other way around. If you may have the best place in the world to work at, but like, your loved ones at home are suffering, and
Yeah.
they hate every bit of that day. And I figured out relatively quickly, for myself, that when I ranked universities, and I'm like, I don't know, why is this university above the other one, and so on and so forth, and that my spreadsheet scoring, like, I don't know, this is good for quality of life, 5-star and 3-star and whatever else, was even not complete. Like, there's an intuition. Like, but if you do these numerical exercises, you figure out relatively quickly. So what your actual sort of preferences are. And again, I got lucky sort of in the end that I had a shot at a place that we'd be really happy at. But sort of also coming back to what you said about unconditional love, I'll never forget that. That was at a point in time that there was an opportunity we might have been able to stay in London. Some of the postdocs got offered assistant professorships, and there was a point in time where we were sort of really looking into this, and it was relatively clear that what you needed to do for that is publish. So there was no secret behind this. So I had a pipeline of 3 papers with different authors, all of them very accomplished, very well published. All of them, I'm not sure whether they were just being nice, but at least to me, they said, this is one of the, if not the best thing in my pipeline right now. And it was a point in time that my wife was pregnant. We had for sort of health reasons, a scheduled cesarean. So I knew exactly when I would go on parental leave. Like, I knew the date. And so I was literally like, okay, this paper, then this paper, then this paper, then I had all of them sent out. And at the point in time that I was at home, they all came back within 3 days, all rejects. All of them, like the entire pipeline. This is it. This is like the 3 papers. I just need one of them to go through. I don't need all 3. I just need one. 3 different authors, all of them saying this is a good one. Reject, reject, reject in 3 days.
Oh my God.
And I just went to the living room and played with my kid.
I don't think people understand that, like, the emotional in other fields, it's maybe not as so much work that's involved, because it's more team. There's a bigger team usually, but in our field, it's like years often of work to go into these. Wow, that was insane. That was a crazy moment.
Yeah, but how to say it was also what helped me to figure out that, again, what I said before, at the end of the day, if I had to prioritize or just not prioritize, that wouldn't even make sense. Rank relatively, yeah, just how much more is life important than work. It gave me really important information.
So,
that at the end of the day, I can go home and play with my kid, and that's more important than if I publish a paper. I need the job, I understand that, yes. But I don't need to have the job if at the end of the day it's enough that I can go home and play with my kid.
that's amazing. I don't think I could add too much more to that. Because I mean, it's so much growth and perspective that you have in just a matter of a day or two.
I wish I didn't.
Yeah, I know. That's yeah, you'd probably be far more successful at this moment, right? So we got a few more moments. We can either talk about what are the differences that you're thinking in terms of doing the doctorate, because I know in Germany they do have industrial type, more focus of doctoral research. Or we could talk about that, or you can think about what would you tell my audience of whatever, X number of people around the world, depending on what video it is. Sometimes it's 5 people, and it's my mom is probably twice, and other times it's more than that. So I don't know what you're thinking in terms of where we should take the conversation for the next 5-10 minutes.
I'll be short, and I'll try to touch on both. So the first one, most importantly, hi to your mom.
She'll say hi. She watches it.
And if she watches it twice, use different accounts to upvote twice.
All right, absolutely. Yeah.
What would I say to the audience? I mean, I think I said it already. It's you need to get a feel for why you're in the game. Are you in it for the journey, or are you going somewhere? And both is fine. I'm not saying just because I have this sort of I want to go somewhere, and I don't mean this as a status hierarchy. I say, like, there's things that questions that interest me, places I want to be, where ideally me and the family will settle down geographically, all these sort of things. They matter to me, and I try to make them part of my decision making. And while other people, and this is actually a colleague conversation that I even have here with colleagues when we teach PhDs on how we should do career planning, they would fiercely disagree. They would say, I know you cannot plan this. You should sort of focus on your core things that you're good at, and then see which opportunities open up and react. And I'm not saying that I'm right and they're wrong. I'm sort of saying you should sort of understand what your worldview is and act accordingly, because otherwise you'll be confused, and you need to figure out, like, when people give you advice, where they're coming from, because otherwise they will be confusing you. Mm-hmm. But other than that, I mean, you need a lot of information to figure out sort of what the things are. And it comes back to sort of what you said about the stuff that is online. Don't get that information online from somebody on LinkedIn who tells you sort of, I have this great career, and I tell you how to do all these sort of things. It's just, oh my gosh.
Talk to real people, right?
And the point there very often is what seems like a really big ask and a really big thing for you is actually very often a 2-liner for somebody else, or like a 3-minute email, because you may have a question that you never thought of or dared asking or couldn't express. Well, the person you're asking this question to eventually not only has received this email 100 times, so they know exactly what they can write, but they've also spent a lot of time thinking about this, and they may be capable of expressing this. So David is looking forward to all of your emails at this stage on that. Yeah, so don't hesitate. Sort of asking. And that sort of ties into sort of the other parts of these institutional differences. So as you were rightly saying, in Germany, but in other places in particular, we call them sort of industrial PhDs. Sort of would be the proper sort of anglicized translation. We call them just external PhDs, because for us, an internal one is somebody who has a position that comes with a teaching obligation. Basically, you're hired to be an RA and a TA whilst you're doing your PhD. That's an internal candidate, and somebody who just does a PhD is usually an external candidate. They have no employment contract with the university, and they're doing this more or less on the side. And of course, that's what it means. They're doing this on the side. They will very often receive less training. They will receive less institutional support. And if they're capable of overcoming that, so they seek the training, they seek the institutional support, they will do fantastic work if they can leverage where they are. So if they might bring fantastic data that from their own past, data access from where they are in the present, and just a general sort of contextual understanding of what is sort of relevant and what is important. Now, but if they don't bring those two together, then what they'll do is a potentially exciting project report. And so they fix an issue that they care about. It may still be very well done, don't get me wrong, very important and a very difficult issue, but they will struggle on developing the classic sort of theoretical contribution. Yeah, sort of what about the problem that you are facing? Did we already know in advance? And what about the solution that you have developed has general applicability? And that sort of is the core problem of a problem that sounds like I knew. But for me, that's what I think is the core problem of the industrial PhDs, is the problem question, whatever else that you're working on. Does it have a potential to be generalizable? Yeah, it does. If it's your company, do other companies have the same problem?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, is everyone struggling with it? And I do this more in my master thesis because I don't work a lot with external PhDs, but I would ask the folks, if after you've done this piece of work, you would start a consulting company, what would be your competitive advantage? Yeah, what is it that you and only you in the world can do because you fixed that problem? And if they can't answer that question, that's sort of then they are they may not need a theoretical contribution because they may not be interested in doing this. Most of our industrial PhDs do not. They're not the Harvard DBA that all of them become Harvard faculty. And most of them do the PhD in order to sort of move up in the ranks because it's nice to have you get a DR in front of the name on your name tag in Germany. And that's high status, as I was sort of saying at the beginning. But this sort of mindset of being able to abstract and generalize, yeah, if we can teach that I would already sort of consider a success in sort of working with this kind of sort of student approach. And again, some of these people are like, wow, I really like this, let me do more of this, and they sort of move and become part of the system. And you see how the difficulty is but it's the same difficulty that actually applies to our internal candidates. If you don't understand what this theoretical contribution is, that there's something about your problem that produces a nonlinearity in our understanding that really extends our understanding, that in a sense goes beyond whatever like the best shot would have been at your question, so that whatever answer you develop is something we couldn't have necessarily foreseen. That is even more difficult for our industrial PhDs, because they sort of torn between very often fixing a problem that they're still working on full time, and a mindset that sort of doesn't necessarily trigger them towards this. Okay, what's the general question here? What's the sort of abstract solution that could be reapplied in other settings?
Yeah, and I think it's not just a matter, I was just thinking in my head, is a matter of time and commitment. I don't think it's that. I think that there's actually more to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a colleague that has been quite successful in sort of both attracting talent, but also seeing some of these people become researchers. And I know also many of my colleagues do this in PhD interviews, that they give this sort of, this is not going to be the glorious lifestyle. This is going to be, 3, 4, 5 years of boot camp with lots of sort of tears and so on and so forth. And he sort of, for external candidates, he makes that speech sort of even more extreme. He's basically saying, for the next X years, all your weekends and all your vacations belong to me. And if people like, I'm not saying this is, you should threaten people or something like this. I'm saying, if, just as you were saying, this is a lot of this is just, again, doing the hard work. And this is difficult enough to imagine how some people are thinking about this being possible as a side gig, when many of us cannot deal it in the hours that we have.
Yeah.
So at the very least, they should understand up front, if they want to do this seriously, then sort of this is what you're letting yourself in. But again, so some people may have less time, but then they should also do a less sort of ambitious of these kinds of projects. I don't know, you write one paper rather than 3, and you have a little training, understanding that means also the impact you may have on the field is smaller, and that's fine. Sort of, there's different programs and different choices in all of these things, but it comes back to the same issue that sort of I try to identify for so my career planning. Why are you doing this in the first place? And that may then give you different choices in where or how or with whom or for what purpose do you do what kind of sort of industrial PhD precisely. And again, there will have been people that have done this before you, so you can ask the alumni or see what the process was like in the past, and I know whether they published and whether they didn't, or I know what the minimum bar was that you have to cross. Again, whatever would be what motivates you to do this kind of effort.
Yeah, that's a good stopping point right now, because I think we all face what you're saying, even if you go into and do the traditional route that everybody says. We all make decisions in terms of whether we want to focus a lot on something or get much more richer understanding. And it's not just a matter of publishing in a journal, but there's also, will you actually publish things that people will read? Right. And that is a big difference. That is quantitatively different. And it's a struggle in trying to figure out what that actually is. And we all kind of are like, don't know what the right answer is, right? And we probably wish that it was a lot more easier. But I don't know what I don't know how to make it easier. I think that's the thing. And we should embrace that to some degree.
No, absolutely. I mean, we can. It's just like, how to say, organizing innovation. I mean, at the end of the day, you don't. If it's not exactly the same thing that you've done yesterday, you don't really know what's going to happen, whether the market's going to accept it or whatever, all these sort of things. So it's going to be difficult enough not to mess up until the point in time where that final test happens. But there's a lot of sort of control we have until this point. We have in control of our inputs, of our choices, and all of this. But just like, I don't know, acceptance on a product market, quite a lot of the things in sort of our academic life are where the quality of the output, or the assessment of the quality of the output, is beyond our control, and that's fine. We still control the input. We still control the process.
Absolutely. So thank you so much. This was very enlightening, and I learned a tremendous amount about you. In terms of, I had no idea that you had 3 rejections all at once. That was
a lot more since.
Wow. That's fun. But then I'm laughing because it's more of a nervous laughter than anything. Taking that step back and saying, "Oh, wow, maybe this is not everything," I think is important. So thank you so much, Oliver. I do appreciate you taking the time. I know, just to give you a perspective in terms of how I think about this, I think about this in terms of financial costs. This probably costs you a couple of $1,000s worth of your time. So I absolutely appreciate that you're here.
Thank you for having me.